Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first virtual edition of Musically Speaking Concert Preview, exploring the opening program of the Handel and Haydn Society's 207th season. Everyone here in the H&H family is excited to welcome you back in person to Symphony Hall later this week. I'm Emily Marvosh. I'm a member of the H&H Chorus, and I'm your moderator for today's live stream. Tonight, we will learn a little bit about the Vivaldi Four Seasons program with Teresa Neff, H&H's Christopher Hogwood Historically Informed Performance Fellow. Hello, Teresa.
Hello, Emily.
And we also get the chance to talk with H&H concertmaster and leader of these performances, Aisslinn Nosky. Aisslinn, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Emily. Happy to be here.
This is the opportunity for all of you to ask all of your questions about the repertoire on the program, preparing for the performance, the historical instruments that we'll see this weekend, and what it's like to make music on the 50-yard line at Gillette Stadium. Anything that's on your mind today, you can ask it. You can submit your questions at any time. We're going to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can submit a question anytime. I'll be sort of collecting those questions and then referring them back to Teresa and Aisslinn at the end of the program. And we will do our best to get to as many of them. You can also use the Q&A feature if you're having any technical issues with this live stream. We have a team, an H&H team behind the scenes that would be glad to assist you with any technical issues. And I will also mention that this webinar will be recorded and we will be sharing it on the H&H website. Teresa, I know the Symphony Hall staff are ready. They practiced last weekend with the Boston Symphony Orchestra's season opener, ready for us this weekend. But many parts of the Handel and Haydn Society concert experience are going to be different than they ever have been in the past with vaccine checks and mask enforcement. So will you still be having your usual Musically Speaking preview live on the days of the concert?
Yes, that will not change. We will gather in Higginson Hall like we always do. And Friday night around 6:45, Sunday afternoon 2:15. And the only thing that might be a little bit different is we'll put a little more space between the chairs to give everybody a chance to kind of be comfortable and spread out a little bit.
Okay, so for folks who couldn't make it today, you can also attend as well in Symphony Hall. And Aisslinn, this is a new opportunity for us to talk to you in advance of a performance, because usually the musicians are doing their last minute checks, their tuning, all of the last minute preparations that happen so frantically backstage. I'm really grateful that we could have this time to chat with you without the pressure of a concert countdown.
It's true. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here because I often miss Teresa's chats because I'm too busy tuning my instrument or practicing those last minute things that need to be practiced. So it's really, really fun to be here.
So Teresa, there are three pieces on this program, and we'll be kind of digging deeply into the Vivaldi Four Seasons today, but let's start with the first piece on the program. It's by Handel, and Handel is an old friend to most of the people who are tuning in here today, as well as the panelists. Tell us a little bit about, just very briefly, the story of Handel's water music.
Well, it's an interesting story in that it was basically a publicity stunt, I would say, on the part of the king, not on the part of Handel. The king was getting, usurped a little bit in the public's attention by his son. And so there was a plan to take this barge trip down the Thames to have dinner and then come back again. And so the music that accompanies this trip is what we call Handel's water music. It's a set of suites, Baroque dance suites. And it is said that King George enjoyed this music so much that he had it played 3 times over the course of their travels. And so, you know, it just has this wonderful sense of celebration. I think it's a perfect way to welcome everybody back to Symphony Hall.
Absolutely. And something that we probably couldn't do today is get a bunch of musicians out on a boat on the Charles River with all those valuable instruments. And then the second piece on the program, Aisslinn, I want to talk a little bit about. This will be the second performance by H&H of Jonathan Woody's Suite for Orchestra. Can you tell us a little bit about that piece?
That's right. Jonathan Woody, who's a fabulous singer and musician and composer, wrote this beautiful piece for us that we got to play during the shutdown, the pandemic. We performed it for each other and we made a recording of it, which I'm very proud of. But this will be actually the world premiere in terms of performing for a live audience, this music that Jonathan Woody wrote for us, which I think is absolutely stunning. And I'm so glad that we managed to come out of the shutdown with, which was a little bit of a negative experience. We would have liked to have been performing for people, but I'm so happy that we have something that's it feels like a gift that we have this new item, this new piece in our repertoire that we can actually share with people in real life, and I can't wait to play it for everyone so that they'll experience it for the first time and in the way that I did 6 months ago. It's rare to get to play new music when you specialize in historical performance the way we do, and it's so exciting.
Absolutely. And there is a great written interview with Jonathan Woody. It's on handelandhaydn.org on the concert page for this concert. So if you want to do your bookworms out there, if you want to do a little bit more reading before you come to the hall on Friday, that's a fantastic interview, and it gives a little bit more background in the composer's own voice, which we don't often have the chance to hear. So I will step out of the way. Teresa, you have a great program planned to sort of drill down deeply into one of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. So I will let you take it away, and I'll come back with questions in a little bit.
All right, we'll see you soon. I am going to share my screen with everyone. And here we have just a little bit about Vivaldi before we jump into a kind of closer look at just the opening of one of the concertos. You know, we know Vivaldi is a violin virtuoso and composer, of course. What he's most remembered for is codifying this idea of concerto, a work for a large ensemble plus a soloist or maybe a small group of soloists. And he wrote somewhere in the area of 500 concertos. The thing that I find them so fascinating about these, and I think why we come back to them again and again, is because he set up these patterns and then he manipulates the patterns in just wonderfully creative ways. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely in relation to the Four Seasons. This collection of 4 concertos for a soloist, solo violin and strings, was published in 1725, but we know that the works existed before the publication date. And they're part of a larger collection of actually 12 concertos. And the whole collection was called the intersection or the trial, the contest of harmony and invention. I like the word intersection here because harmony refers to the ideas of the rules, the structures, and invention, the idea of the imagination. And so I think the Four Seasons are a beautiful example of how those two aspects of music, really, right? The structure and the imagination come together. And I think that's part of the reason why these works, basically since the 1720s up through today, are so important and so much a part of our concert life. Vivaldi set the concerto by just writing so many of them so consistently in those 3 movements that we know so well, and featuring that large ensemble and the passages for the soloist. Where I want to go is to the opening of Autumn. Not only because it's October, but also because Vivaldi does 2 things here that I think are really interesting, and we can use it as an example of all of his concertos, but certainly the concertos in the Four Seasons. He establishes a mood, and that mood is related to poetry. There is a poem for each one of the concertos, and this opening ritornello is part of the mood established by the pair of lines: the peasants celebrate in dance and song the sweet pleasure of the rich harvest. So if we just listen to the opening ritornello, I'm sure it is very familiar. we go on from there. Now, part of what I think is so interesting about this opening is how it's structured. We have 5 phrases, and 4 of those phrases end in a rest, where we simply have a pause. The interesting phrase is phrase 3, because it does not have a rest, and it's actually the shortest of all 5 phrases. It becomes the place where Vivaldi deviates from his pattern, but he doesn't deviate completely. And that's what I'd like to look at just a little more closely before we go back and listen to this ritornello one more time. So what I've done here is put in a blue dotted outline, the rest. That is the place where all the action stops. And also something that's very important, very consistent in this opening ritornello. It helps, I even think, establish the mood. This little rhythmic pattern, da, 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 da. And so you'll see that in green every time it comes by. The other thing we can notice is phrase 1 basically generates everything else we're going to hear. So here's the second phrase. It's the same as phrase 1. It's just played more quietly and an octave lower. And then here's phrase 3. It has that da, 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 da rhythm, but its melody changes. It has this wonderful leap down, and that catches our ear. Vivaldi repeats it, and perhaps we think that's going to be where we go from here on in, but of course he doesn't. He, with phrase 4, takes us back to the basic idea of phrase 1, but the thing that's missing is the da 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 da. He changes that to make it a more driving sound. And then phrase 5 is a repetition of phrase 4, but again, lower, an octave lower, and perhaps played quietly. So having kind of parsed out the phrases this way, I'd like to play this one more time, and we can follow how the phrases change. Phrase 2. And then, of course, we're off into the solo part, and even that solo part picks up that phrase, that rhythmic idea. And from there, Vivaldi then expands into all kinds of wonderful places. And of course, the poem changes further into this movement as well. It's not just about the pleasures of the harvest, but also about being fired by Bacchus's liquor, and how that many of the peasants will end their enjoyment in sleeping. And from there, we go into our second movement, of course, and our third. That's just a little microcosm, I think, of the wonderful way that Vivaldi can kind of set up a pattern, manipulate it, and play with our expectations. And I think that's part of the reason why these pieces are just so beloved for almost 300 years. And with that in mind, I think we need to go into the other part of the story. We have the notes written on the page, but we need our musicians to bring it to life, to make this tradition a living tradition. And so I'd like to turn to Aisslinn and ask you a question that I find endlessly fascinating. And that is, you have the notes on the page. As a musician, as a performer, how do you deal with them? What do you think about when there's so much repetition, and then maybe some of these little changes? How do you as a performer kind of approach a piece like The Four Seasons?
It's a great question, Teresa, and I love your insight into the beginning of this concerto. I think this is one of the most perfect parts of the Four Seasons in terms of the way that Vivaldi constructed these phrase lengths. And so thanks for bringing bringing that out. And it's there's not one answer to your question. Uh, so I'll try to give something that makes a little bit of sense to people. Uh, it's it's daunting to play. It can be daunting to play a work as famous as The Four Seasons, at least in my experience, because I love it. We all love it, and there's lots of reasons for that. I think the reason I love it is that Vivaldi gives us what I think of as a template for what to do. He gives us some information about how to play, but not all of it. He gives us pitches, he gives us the notes to play. He gives us a suggestion of how quickly or slowly to play it, in this case, allegro, which means fast. And he occasionally gives us indications of how loud to play. He can say piano or forte, loud or soft, but soft or loud, but he doesn't say anything more than that. And so you can make your own decisions after that. And I think that there are lots of things to decide about after that. How loud? How soft? Is it very loud? Is it very soft? Are the note lengths very long? Are they very short? What's the attitude that you're playing with? What's the emotional content of what you're feeling when you're playing? And he doesn't give that many instructions. He suggests things in these concertos, which are wonderful because he gives you the narrative of the poetry. But even that, it's not definite. So in this case, he says, I'm looking at my score now, play, it's a feast, it's a peasant dance. What does that mean? It could mean something different to every single person in the orchestra. But what's fun, one of the funnest things is actually figuring out what that means to us in the moment today when we're playing it together. And so that recording, which is absolutely beautiful, I'd like to acknowledge Apollo's Choir playing
Apollo's
with
Fire. Yes.
Apollo's Choir with Olivier Brault playing, a wonderful violinist playing the solo. It's absolutely fast. I love it. And yet I don't play it like that. we don't play it like that. We have a slightly, I would say, if I had to characterize it, that we take at H&H, we're going to take on Friday night, I think, a slightly slower tempo. And this figure you spoke about, da 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 da, we do kind of like a da 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 ba ba da ba ba, and it's the same notes, but it has a different, to me, a different characterization. I think of this as I feel a bit of a swagger in this music, as though maybe I've already started to have a little bit too much fun at the festival, maybe, uh, and I think that actually Vivaldi not telling us what to do was intentional. I really believe, and I would love to, maybe someday I'll find out, or I'll never know, but I think he's inviting, by writing the bare bones, he's inviting and he's expecting that we will put our own personalities and our own wants and needs into the music to make these decisions about how long to play the notes, how fast to play the notes, how loud and how soft. And it's so exhilarating. And every time I play the Four Seasons, it's a different performance and it sounds different. And I've played it, I've stopped counting how many times, and that's so fun.
Is there a passage, these are virtuosic solo passages. Is there a passage that you just look forward to?
It's great. I no, in autumn, I don't know if I look forward to them in autumn. I'm going to be honest with our dear patrons.
But anywhere.
This is no, it's, listen, I like a challenge. This is the most difficult concerto for me personally. So it's not that I'm not looking forward to it, but it's pretty risky. It's just hard. So in this one, the difficult parts that sound difficult really are difficult. If you want to see me having fun, the previous concerto, Summer, is, I think it sounds harder than it is to me. So I'm maybe I'm showing off a bit, but in autumn, I'm actually trying to keep my fingers on my violin and not fall off. So, which is fun in its own way,
Well, there's a challenge there.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, I am sure that there are many other questions. So let me invite Emily Marvosh back and we can take it from there.
Great. Thank you. Teresa, there is a question from Ron Guerrero that I want to put to you, and it's a big question. So whittle it down as you like. Where would you put Vivaldi's Four Seasons in the evolution of Baroque music in Europe. So it's well known to us today, but where did it fit in its historical context?
So it was published in 1725, and that publication made it, kind of a landmark piece. But we know these concertos existed before that. They were played, but they weren't published, right? They're circulating perhaps in manuscript. The other manuscript that happens is 1726, the year after the publication. A manuscript is prepared for a cardinal in Rome, Cardinal Ottoboni, who is well known to handle Corelli. He's a patron of the arts and music. And so that's one resource, right? The other thing that happens is that Paris really likes the Four Seasons. And they get premiered in the 1720s at public concerts, the Concert Spirituel. And it's interesting because all four are done, but then it seems like the taste of the time is that they really like spring. So eventually we just hear spring more often than we hear any of the other concertos. And so, that was an important kind of dissemination. The other part of that story I should tell goes back to Ottoboni. That particular manuscript ended up in the hands of Charles Jennens in England. And you might know Charles Jennens' name because he is the person who supplied the libretto to Handel for the Messiah, as well as some other works. So there is kind of a diffusion of the Four Seasons that way. But really in the 20th century, that's when we really got a renewed interest in the work. I think it was in the 1940s. It's one of the first works recorded on a 78. And I have not done the deep dive for this data, but I have read that by the end of the 20th century, there were somewhere in the area of 19 new recordings of the Four Seasons produced every year, which is pretty astounding.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. That's so fascinating. If I could jump in, it's not about the Four Seasons, but I found a little factoid. I was researching something else by Vivaldi. I like Vivaldi, and it is as important as the Four Seasons was. So that was Vivaldi's 8th opus 8. Apparently, I read somewhere, I can send this article to you, that actually his opus 3 concerti were actually republished more frequently in the 18th century than even his opus 8. So if just to say, for fans of the Four Seasons, which is opus 8, you're going to love opus 3. Check it out.
Absolutely. And it's opus 3 that Bach encounters and Bach copies out. And, it's the opus 3 where we say Bach basically learned from Vivaldi, not maybe how to write a concerto, but how to open a concerto, right? With a real kind of bang.
I mean, I will go so far as to say, I thank you. The Bach's writing starts to sound a little more Italianate, a little more Vivaldi-ish to me after he encounters opus 3. Sorry, Bach. In a good way.
No, it's good. He's learning. It's fantastic. Yeah.
There is a question here in the Q&A. What aspects of the piece, I'm assuming the Vivaldi, will be quote unquote historical in the H&H performance? So Aisslinn, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, so we'll be using instruments from the 18th century, so instruments that Vivaldi himself would have written for and played, because he was one of the best violinists, if not the best violinist in the world at the time. I think he was probably incredible, and I would give anything to have gone to one of his concerts. So we'll be using the equipment that he knew, which has a different sound than the instruments of today. So that's the historical part of it. And the contemporary part of it is that it's me playing it, and it's us. And there's lots of we're the people of today. We are who we are, and we're very different in so many ways that I can understand and probably not understand from people in the 18th century. I can tell you, for one, in one sort of obvious instance that actually it was not considered possible for a woman to be a professional violinist in the 18th century because it was not an appropriate instrument to play in public. So I don't care. So I'm playing it. So there you go. We've got old and new.
And I have a question for you because we've talked about how these pieces are in many ways a blank slate, open to the interpretation of the musicians who play them. So there are four concertos. Will you talk a little bit about how H&H and Aisslinn Nosky specifically ornament the end of them and transition from one to the other for the prospective audience members?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. The four concertos, I don't think that Vivaldi meant for them to be performed as a cycle. I don't think he anticipated for them to be played all at once without stopping, is what I mean. And because there's lots of reasons for that. They're practical. It's the key relationships are difficult. The practical issues are difficult. I don't think he put these four concertos together to be played all at once. I think he did it because they're incredible music and because people would enjoy it and because they would probably sell a lot of copies and make money, which they did. So I actually I choose to play the four concertos all at once without stopping in between the concertos because I find it more exciting that way. Each concerto is about 10 minutes, so there's four of them. So you put them together, it's about 40 minutes, which actually equals the length of most of the major famous romantic violin concertos we know. That's about the length of Brahms or Beethoven's incredible concertos. And so I personally have decided to play a little cadenza at the end of each concerto to go to the next one so that the flow of the concert can be kept going rather than stopping for applause, which I love applause. But I like to have this, I play a little cadenza, a little solo moment, and then I string the concertos together because I think that it kind of heightens the excitement of them. And I don't know. I mean, maybe someday I'll find out that Vivaldi thought that was a terrible idea, but he really liked showmanship. So by instead of stopping and sort of restarting every three movements, we all try to keep the energy going with these little cadenzas that string them together so that after 40 minutes you get hopefully a bigger applause, if I'm honest. It's fun.
I think that's great. So there will be almost like a continuous flow of music for the cycle of a year. And Teresa, I find it very interesting that these pieces were split up almost from the first time that they were played. Do people ever play them all four together but out of order? Is there any precedent for starting with winter or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I don't know of any, to be honest with you. Aisslinn, do you know of a practice doing that?
No, it's probably not that common. I think that I have done it, not as a soloist. I've done them out of order. But I think it's maybe a little bit, it probably feels a little unnatural because my personal view would be that because the cycle of the seasons is one so familiar to us that it feels a little strange might feel weird to start with winter when yeah it's such a yeah pervasive feeling that we all know this cycle of the seasons, which is I think one of the reasons the pieces are so beloved is that we've all been through a year or two. Yeah, and we know what that's like. So
Yeah, especially this year. There's a great question from an audience member, an attendee. And this is interesting, especially for this concert, what is the dynamic between a conductor and the concertmaster in performing a piece? So there are two questions to this. When we do have a conductor and a concertmaster, or in this case, Aisslinn, when it's your show, what are the differences and dynamics there?
yeah, well, as you said, we have no conductor this week because and we often do at H&H, but this particular piece by Vivaldi was not actually composed with a conductor in mind. They didn't even exist yet, really. The concertmasters, the reason the name comes from master of the concert. So the violinists were most commonly the people who direct the concerts, but it would occasionally be the keyboardists or even another instrumentalist. So we don't have a conductor this week. So I'm telling everybody what to do, but no, I'm not. I'm inviting them to play with me, and we're having a lot of fun. But when there's a conductor, when we play different kinds of repertoire, Handel oratorios or sacred music, things with choir, the conductor is the boss and is in charge, is the I would say ultimate authority on stage. And then my job as a concertmaster becomes to try to liaise between the ultimate authority who's directing everything and to try to help. I feel like I become sort of middle management at that point. I try to be the person who helps direct the largest section on the stage that's not the chorus, which is the string section. There's just a lot of us. And so my job at that point, when there's a conductor, becomes to try to clarify and strengthen and help the conductor have their intentions become very clear to the string section. So it's really fun for me because I get to do these kinds of different roles. And by that I mean I'll say to the conductor, do you mean this? And I'll demonstrate, and then I'll say to the string section, let's play like this. And then they'll do it because they're wonderful and nice and great players. So it's really fun. It's an in-between kind of role, and I like doing both of them.
All right, this question is for both of you, and I'll start with Teresa. Do you have a favorite movement of the Four Seasons, a favorite season?
Wow, that is really hard, and it may change from performance to performance. But as of this moment, I'll leave autumn aside. I love winter. I just think it's fantastic. I know, we were talking about performing them out of order. You almost wouldn't want to because of the way the major and minor keys are set up, and winter's in minor, and it feels so powerful to me. So that's where I would go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. I think Autumn is a perfectly constructed concerto. I marvel at at Vivaldi's compositional skill in it, and yet it's hard to execute, so I get a little nervous. So I actually, and also I'm Canadian, so I'm going with winter. But so at the point where winter starts, I'll have been going for about half an hour, and I'm covered in sweat. Well, glowing. I'm glowing. I don't sweat. So it's getting kind of hot in there. And there's this moment, the second movement of Winter, where to me everything just stops. And the poem is about depicts a person inside a house enjoying and relaxing in front of a fireplace while there's a storm outside with pellets of ice hitting the roof. And it's a beautiful. So the second movement of Winter, it's a beautiful melody, and I love to just sing it like the loudest tenor you've ever heard, singing the slowest song ever, and just soaking, just oozing up every moment of comfort. Yeah, I like it a lot. And then of course, it explodes at the end like Winter. So that's my moment.
That's great. Teresa, to go all the way back to the beginning of Autumn, and you talk about these poems that accompanied these four movements. Was that typical? I mean, we think of composers like Mahler, writing these sort of paragraphs about what he wants us to think about when we're listening to his symphonies. But was that common for composers of Vivaldi's time?
It wasn't particularly common. It was done. But these four works with these attached poems really do stand out as something rather unique. Vivaldi wrote other works with descriptive titles. The Storm at Sea, The Hunt, Pleasure. And in fact, the first 6 concertos of Opus 8 all have some kind of descriptive title, but only the first 4 have these poems. So, he does it, and other composers will do it, but it's not really all that common, right? Particularly if you take 500 concertos, we've got a couple of handfuls maybe with descriptive titles.
May I jump in and ask a little question, Teresa? I'm just curious what you think. So there's nobody knows who wrote, as far as I know, nobody knows who wrote the poems. Right. Do you think it was Vivaldi? What do you think?
I suspect it was.
I do too.
He was known to write poetry. And you know, I think we can be brutally honest. It might not be the most elegant poetry we've ever read, but the imagery is very powerful, and I think it's very charming because of that. So I lean towards Vivaldi.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
My friends who are native Italian speakers, more than one of them has said it's not the best poetry. Probably Vivaldi, and I love that. It's so
Well, and it uses Venetian dialect
yeah,
as well. Some of the spellings in the original are Venetian spellings as
such a
opposed
good
to,
point.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it you know, it could vary, or a friend, you know. I think he certainly had a hand in it.
Oh, there are still some mysteries that we haven't yet solved about music that's 300 years old, and that's part of the mission of the Handel and Haydn Society. So thank you for helping us dig a little bit more deeply into it today. One last question, this one's for Aisslinn. The rumors are true. You were part of the group that performed the national anthem at the Patriots game against Tampa Bay on Sunday. Just in a few words, tell us what that experience was like for you.
I can't do it in a few words. It was so meaningful. I was so it was so I'm so proud that I got to be there and to play. I recently got my green card, and right before the pandemic started, and it meant so much to me to be able to play the national anthem in front of 65,000 people who were singing it from the bottom of their hearts. It's something I'm never going to forget. And I'm here. You're stuck with me now. So, here I am.
Welcome. We're
Thank
glad you're here.
you.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Aisslinn. And I am even more excited than I was before about the concerts this weekend. I can't wait to hear how it's all coming together, and I feel that the information that we've gained tonight will help me put it more into context. So we look forward to welcoming everybody in person at Symphony Hall on Friday evening and Sunday afternoon, and it'll also be streaming via the new video platform H&H Plays On, and you can visit handelandhaydn.org for more information on that. All right, the Red Sox and the Yankees are getting underway, so we all have somewhere to be in a few minutes. Thank you very much, Teresa and Aisslinn. Thank you for everyone for these questions, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye, everybody.